Messiah? Could he be Messiah? The one whom the prophets foretold? The love that he teaches, the message he preaches, is it he in the scriptures of old?
And God said to Solomon, I have given thee wisdom, and I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days. And it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, that he began to build the house of the Lord. And the house which King Solomon built for the Lord, the length thereof was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 20 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits. And the king commanded, and they prepared great stones, costly stones, and hewed stones, to lay the foundation of the house. And Solomon's builders did hew them, and the stone squarers. So they prepared timber and stones to build the house of the Lord.
King Solomon built the greatest and the finest temple ever built by human hands. He really did a marvel. And he built the western wall, which is behind me. You see it there, where the people are praying, in order to retain the mountain so that the big stone structures could go on the top. On the top now you see the Muslim Dome of the Rock. Times have changed and empires have shifted. And we're in a time now when the temple is down, it's been destroyed. It'll be built up again by the other great temple builder, the Messiah, when he comes. Meanwhile, the prayer goes on at the wall. You can see them, you can hear them. The prayer's been going on here for thousands of years. During the dispersion, it's been going on. It went on after Titus when he destroyed the temple and the whole city of Jerusalem, and for bad prayer, they still came and prayed. It went on after Hadrian when he put the temple of Jupiter up there where you see the Muslim dome, a Roman temple to a pagan god they knew nothing about. They still came and they prayed. Mohammed came, and then this gorgeous dome was built to commemorate him. Still the prayer went on down below at the wall. The Crusaders came and they put a cross on the dome and they made a Christian church. And still the Jews patiently prayed there at the wall. That was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. The Turks were yet to come and stay here for 4 centuries, and the Jews prayed at the wall, and then the British, and now the modern Arabs and the PLO. But uninterrupted, day after day, the prayer goes on at the wall. Well, it just shows the tenacity of the people of Shlomo HaMelech, Solomon the king. He was a brilliant and accomplished man. He was the author of 1,005 Proverbs. He wrote the Song of Solomon. He wrote Ecclesiastes. His brilliant thoughts are collected for us in the book of his Proverbs. He was a scientist. He did experiments in botany and zoology. And he was the greatest temple builder of all. You could take the Great Pyramid of Egypt and put it between the walls of this temple. When it was standing, its walls went around a circumference of more than a mile. The Great Pyramid, the Parthenon, the Roman temples, all of them, they almost could share a place inside of these walls, including the esplanades and the wonderful courtyards and the porticos that were included. This was the largest temple ever built by men. The walls around it, in some places, rose 20 stories. Imagine. Well, as you see the prayer now, they're gathered against one of those walls that goes around. And it has Solomon stones at the bottom. It was improved by King Herod toward the top and finished more in modern times. But if you went down to the very foundation, you would find a great stone that King Solomon himself designed and laid to hold this wall. And so 3,000 years later, it's holding just fine. When Messiah comes and he builds his temple, it will be the same kind of thing. walls around a magnificent temple described in Ezekiel 40 to 48, the millennial house of God. The whole world will know it. In like manner, Solomon built a temple that the federal government and the federal religion were at one place. His palace and the worship of the land were on one site. So when the king is here, the world religion and the world government will be at one site. In Solomon's sanctuary, a stone building, the cedar wood graced the walls and the ceiling and the floor so that if you stood inside and looked in any direction, you couldn't see stone. The cedars of Lebanon were floated down here in an agreement with King Hiram of Tyre to make this magnificent structure. And so beautiful was it, the Queen of the South came to see it. Jesus commended her for that, for coming to see King Solomon and this wonderful Jerusalem. There was gold everywhere. The candlestick was made of solid gold. The spoons and the snuffers and the tools of the temple were golden. The cost of the whole thing, just to put it in terms we can understand, $3 billion in gold and silver in today's values. Imagine what these people gave. A nation of, was it 3 million people? 3,000 millions of dollars went into their house of worship where God said he would dwell among them. King Solomon prayed a magnificent prayer of dedication on that day. He laid out the animals in the temple. He didn't light the fire. He prayed to God, and when he finished praying, God sent a fire down from heaven. In 2 Chronicles 7, verses 1 to 3, it says God himself burned the sacrifices, and that the priests couldn't minister in the place because of the clouds. God was a cloud that took them through the wilderness, and the cloud filled the house so they couldn't even see each other. And the children of Israel looked at it and said, "How good is our God," because he had accepted the temple. So Solomon, like the Messiah, is the temple maker. Some of Solomon's kingdom is behind me. He was a king of a peaceful time. His name, Shlomo, is from the Hebrew shalom, peace. And behind me, of course, is what it looks like 3,000 years later. Still very peaceful looking. Jerusalem in the background and beautiful fields and mountains. You know, he was like Messiah in that way. He's a ruler of peacetime. Messiah is Sar Shalom, Prince of Peace, and Solomon was the king of peace. And like the Messiah, Solomon was the ruler of a golden age. Each empire in the Middle East seemed to have its age. Babylon rose and fell, and Persia and Greece and even Rome came and rose and fell. Well, there once was a time going back further than that, 1,000 years BC, when Israel had its golden age. And King Solomon was the ruler of a huge territory, bigger than modern Israel by far. In like manner, in the millennium to come, the Israel will be the head of the nations, much enlarged. There will be peace on earth, goodwill toward men. We can see the kingdom coming on in a subtle way as men of goodwill are already singing Israeli songs in churches. If you hear it in America, that's heard very often. I think we're getting used to the rhythms and the music and the sounds of the Holy Land because, after all, we'll be with the King of Peace here in this kingdom of Israel for 1,000 years to come. Well, Israel extended from Egypt to the Euphrates under King Solomon, roughly speaking. We can compare his kingdom, which is given in 1 Kings 4:21, with the land grant God gave Abraham in Genesis 15:18. And we'll see that Solomon very nearly satisfied the extremities that God promised his friend Abraham. In 1 Kings 4:21, it says, "And Solomon reigned over all kingdoms, from the river unto the land of the Philistines, and unto the border of Egypt. They brought presents and served Solomon all the days of his life." He made alliances and kept the peace with many nations. They brought him, when it says presents, actually, they paid tribute, and Israel was like a country that administered them, and they were vassal nations. Solomon married the daughters of kings and controlled the territories that he had made with friendly alliances that way. When we look at the land grant to Abraham, it's almost the same, slightly different terms. In Genesis 15:18, God said, "In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates." Now, it bears some discussion what the river of Egypt actually is. Some people assume it's the Nile. Usually it's more assumed to be the Wadi in the Sinai. There is a dry river bed there to the east of Egypt proper. Egypt had both sides of the Nile. It probably meant from the Wadi all the way up. Of course, the river Euphrates is very clear. It is where it always was. And it includes all of the territory of Syria. So it's definitely not fulfilled in that sense today. In the kingdom to come, it will reach its fulfillment. That is the southern border of greater Israel, you might say, the Israel God envisioned for the kingdom. The western border, of course, is the Mediterranean Sea. On the east, Jordan, or the eastern plateau beyond the Jordan, where some of the Israelite tribes settled early on, and in the north, the Euphrates. Now, all were controlled by Israel in Solomon's time, but it's in a different sense in the kingdom. In the kingdom, they will all be one. In Isaiah 19, God refers to Assyria and Egypt and Israel as one nation. Assyria, the work of my hands, Israel, mine inheritance, and Egypt, my people. It's all the same thing. That's different than it was in Solomon's time when it was a series of separate states. So we really look for Abram's promise in the kingdom to come. But the stress here is that Solomon is so like Messiah in that he ruled a kingdom that's almost the same. The boundaries almost draw the same way. Messiah will rule the kingdoms personally. They all will regard him as king and not as a foreign king. So King Solomon is a type of Messiah in this manner, that like Messiah, he rules in peacetime over an Israel that extends from Egypt to the Euphrates River. Now, there are other ways in which Solomon is symbolic of the Messiah. Solomon was a bridegroom in the Song of Solomon. And of course, Jesus Christ is the groom of the church. We are the bride of Christ. Solomon was a fine writer, and he wrote this beautiful, idyllic little love story, the Song of Solomon. It's not taught that much, but it makes a wonderful point about the greater relationship between the Messiah and his bride, the church. It's a realistic book. It's down to earth. It may be a little bit difficult to read because it has many flashbacks. It's like a real-world love story. It's interrupted by worldly circumstances. It goes back and forth. The lovers lose each other and find each other again. But the whole thing is kind of a story of the stormy relationship between the church and the Messiah. In the Old Testament, Jehovah was married to Israel. They are married. They're separated now. The book of Hosea details a stormy relationship with flashbacks and various adventures, and always the undying love of the husband for the wife. When the church marries Messiah, we'll live with him as the queen in the kingdom to come. It says in Revelation 19:7 and 8, the wife of Christ hath made herself ready, and unto her was appointed fine linen, clean and white, which is the righteousness of saints. It says, blessed is he who comes to the marriage supper of the Lamb. So this is a big love story that we're in, and right now we're engaged, and ultimately we'll be married. Paul speaks to this in his letter to the church at Ephesus, in Ephesians 5:25 to 27. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. Now, it's a mystery, which is something not before revealed in Scripture, but Paul says, this is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. The entire gospel is a bridegroom coming to purchase a bride. In the Israeli tradition, the bridegroom pays for the bride, and so Jesus paid on the cross. He drank the cup. He made the speech about, I go to prepare a place for you, and he's even now making us a bridal chamber in heaven. Now, the Song of Solomon presents a like story of a king leaving the royal palace to seek a maiden who works in the fields, just a plain girl. Solomon is called the Rose of Sharon, the bright morning star, titles like Messiah. The maiden whom he seeks is sunburned. She says, I am black, caused by the sun. She works in a vineyard, and she's unprotected from the sun. This is kind of a symbol of how it is with life on earth. Life on earth, taught Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes, was being under the sun. He said there's nothing new under the sun. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Heaven is above the sun. God lives over the sun. The royal palace is over the sun. But the prince, the king, the bridegroom leaves the palace and comes to seek the sin-tainted maiden of the fields, which is us, which is the church. We're sunburned, working in the vineyard of the earth. And we have an on and again, off again relationship with this bridegroom, rather like the one in Song of Solomon, ultimately ending in a perfect union. So in the manner of Song of Solomon, the king was also a bridegroom. Our king is also a bridegroom, and we're his bride. Solomon was a great writer and a great thinker. The book of Ecclesiastes is so profound, and it's read and respected by secular scholars alike, with people who are Bible believers, because it presents the human condition, frankly, straightforwardly. Solomon realized all this. He lived a very full life. If you read his life, it was an amazing one, and few people have lived one like it. Well, God was pleased to give Solomon wisdom. The king actually asked for that. In 1 Kings 3, 7-12, Solomon prays when he first comes into office as the king. It says, "And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father." And look at the humility. "And I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people which thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered or counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people?" And behind me you can see Jerusalem, the capital of this great nation. It's similar to what it was in the time of Solomon. It is a great and complex people. People who know this people realize God indeed chose for himself a very special people. Well, God was pleased with Solomon's entreaty. He answers it in verse 10, 1 Kings 3:10. "And the speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said unto him, Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but asked for understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and an understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like thee." And it's true. When we speak of Solomon, we speak of wisdom, and when we speak of wisdom, it's Solomon. And everyone knows the expression, the wisdom of Solomon. His wisdom was known in other lands. Other monarchs respected it. It was a heavenly wisdom, and that's the point. He got this from God, not from books and not from learning. In Ecclesiastes, he said, of the writing of books there is no end. He implied that book after book after book is not much help. But this prayer for wisdom impressed everyone, including God. The Queen of Sheba came a long distance to see Solomon. It's a fascinating story. Let me quote from 1 Kings 10, from the beginning of the chapter. "And when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to prove him with hard questions." It's implicit in the verse that she's interested in his faith and in his religion. "And she came to Jerusalem with a very great train, with camels that bear spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. And Solomon told her all her questions." He had the answer to her every question. There was not anything hid from the king which he told her not. "And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all Solomon's wisdom, and the house that he had built, the wonderful temple that she saw, and the meat of his table, and the sitting of his servants, and the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and his ascent by which he went up to the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her." In other words, she had no more pride in her kingdom when she saw this kingdom. "And she said to the king, It was a true report that I heard in mine own land of thy acts and of thy wisdom. Howbeit I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. We might say she hadn't even heard the half of it. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard. Happy are thy men, happy are these thy servants which stand continually before you, and hear thy wisdom. Blessed be the Lord God, says the Ethiopian queen, or the country that was somewhere around Ethiopia, Sheba. Blessed be the Lord thy God, which delighted in thee to set thee on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, therefore made he the king to do judgment and justice. That tribute by an unbiased observer, the Queen of Sheba, commends Solomon in a very special way. And he judged the people. He did have that wisdom and that understanding heart. Just as Messiah will judge, Solomon judged. You recall the case of the two harlots, and one had smothered her infant at night. And it was a sad case. And Solomon heard the witnesses, and he said, cut the baby in half and give half to each mother. And one of the women betrayed indifference, and the other, pathos, and she wept. That was the real mother, and in that way he brought it out. Well, the people were impressed. They loved it, and well they might. Solomon wrote many beautiful proverbs, and in one of them he is very definitely messianic. There's a suggestion of Messiah in this, in Proverbs 34. Who hath ascended up into heaven or descended? Who hath gathered the wind in his fists? Who hath bound the waters in a garment? Who hath established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, and what is his son's name, if thou canst tell? He was talking about Christ, of whom he had the mind. In the New Testament, the scripture is used in 1 Corinthians 2:16. For the Lord hath known the mind, for who hath known the mind of the Lord? Sort of the same question of Solomon. Who knows God? Who hath known the mind of the Lord that he may instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. The heavenly wisdom, the kind of mind Messiah had, Solomon had that kind of mind. He was the temple builder. He was the king of peace. He was the bridegroom. And he was the holder of heavenly wisdom until the king comes. Well, the big question is there a Solomon today? Is there a Shlomo HaMelech, Solomon the king, to rebuild the temple? He was, of course, the temple builder first and foremost, and we're so glad we could show you what's going on at the temple, but that isn't the end of it. We've talked on our other programs about the long history of the temple, the changes that have to be coming up according to scriptural prophecy. 4 verses in the Bible clearly announce the appearance of a temple in the tribulation period, commonly called the tribulation temple. Daniel says that the Antichrist will make a covenant with Israel, and in the midst of the 7-year period he will cause the sacrifices to cease. Well, if there are sacrifices, then there's going to be a temple. The Lord himself in Matthew 24:15, advising Israel on how to behave during the tribulation period and toward the Antichrist, says, when you see the abomination of desolation stand in the holy place, then flee into the hills of Judea. The holy place, HaKodesh, is a room of the temple. In other words, it will be rebuilt, and the Antichrist will enter the temple. We know it also from 2 Thessalonians 2, 3, and 4, where Paul says the Antichrist will go into the temple and declare that he is God. And Revelation 11, 1 to 3, the worshipers of the temple are counted. It's referred to in very clear scripture as existing at that time. And of course what we saw on Mount Moriah now is the Dome of the Rock, the Arab shrine. It cannot refer to that. There are no sacrifices there. It's of course not a Hebrew temple. So people have proposed different solutions. The Jerusalem Great Synagogue, that wouldn't make a very good temple. It's the wrong place, too small, and so on. Some have said to the north of the dome there is enough area to put a Jewish sanctuary, and that's probably where it was. It would line up with the East Gate. That much is true, but to put a Jewish temple next to a Muslim shrine is an impossibility, as we can see. It's spiritually impossible. The temple was where God dwelt among his people on earth. He would not share the site with the shrine of another religion. Well, prayer groups have been going up to the mount, Jewish people, and the police taking them away. The Muslim police on the mount objected to us carrying a Bible when we were filming there. It's a hot spot. It just is going to be. 12268, Dallas, Texas 75225, and Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.